I sort of wanted to start out by just saying where I come from in terms of making art. So I'm an artist and I'm a teacher, and I believe really strongly in art as a form of teaching, and also art as a tool to reflect whatever the place that you're at in whatever moment in life you're at, and that art is a reflection of where you're at, and also art as a tool to communicate, and also a tool to achieve different things. And I'll maybe get into that a little bit more later on in the talk. It's funny that you mentioned that work from undergrad, because in a lot of ways I feel like this installation, as you're seeing it right now, I actually showed it earlier this month in Los Angeles, because I had it all installed in my studio in Los Angeles, and I thought, well, I should just have a show in my studio and show this thing that I put so much effort into installing before I reinstall it, drive it all the way over and reinstall it. So it actually, somebody during that show had asked me how long it took me to build, or how long it took me to put together. And I said, well, it took me about maybe a month, but in reality, the ideas that are in that piece, and some of the visual elements that are in that piece, and the recordings that are in that piece, that I've been working on that piece for the past 15 years or so. I mean, it's the recordings that you can listen to on the telephones. The first one of those I actually recorded when I was 16 of my grandmother, and I've been recording conversations with my grandmother since then, every few years, and then now it's sort of like every conversation we have I record, because I'm obsessed in that way.
No, I didn't want them to take me away from this, you know? And so I said, oh, it's like an orgasm. I thought, Jesus, she flipped.
Things that have kind of lodged in my brain as an idea or as an image over the years, and I've just kind of kept them in my back pocket. And I think that that's actually something that I recommend to students when somebody has you have this idea, but you don't know exactly what it means or how to get it out or how you want to do it. Just don't force it. Just kind of keep it in your back pocket, and maybe now isn't the exact right moment for that idea to come to fruition, but then you'll have that, and it'll come into something else. And really having this opportunity has given me the chance to reflect on some of my older work, and reflect on the ways that I keep revisiting these ideas, and I'll start in this one place, and I'll go over here, and I'll come back here, and then I'll go over here, and then I'll come back here. And it's not, I don't have this real linear progression in terms of my art practice. I feel like in a lot of ways I keep coming back to the same idea with different visions of it. And so I think that actually a lot of the time I will begin my slide lectures with that work that I did in undergrad, which just to give an idea, I was building these complex sort of like faceted shapes out of plywood, and then I would cast molten iron into them, and they would erupt in flames, because plywood is like really, really flammable, and just the construction of them would just sort of like, it was actually like quite a scary fire, and a couple of people got injured pouring them, and I'm sorry. But the resulting casting, so the plywood would burn away, and the way that I had constructed them, what I would be left with is this sort of dollhouse scale, either a house that looked like it had burned down, or a church that looked like it had burned down. And I didn't really know what it was about. Like, I was kind of I was making these things, and I was like really angry, and I wanted to burn stuff, and I didn't like religion, and I used this imagery of like a destroyed home or a burned down home in like these different ways, and I didn't really have the words to articulate it and what it was about. And also during that time, I was doing a lot of photography inside of abandoned mental hospitals. I started photographing abandoned mental hospitals actually when I was in high school, and I continued that for years, going around the whole Northeast and finding different hospitals and photographing them. And I mention that because I feel like both of those series I've revisited in some way with this work, maybe content-wise in terms of the religious aspect, and kind of definitely a different relationship to religion, but also like definitely the visual and aesthetic aspect of those abandoned buildings, and these spaces that I would go into, and it literally looked like people just picked up one day and they walked out, and like they would have photos were still on the wall, and there were clothes still in the closet, and all of these artifacts of the people that had been there were still there, and some of them had been taken, but some of them were left. And the only way that I could imagine capturing that was through photography, and then eventually, as I began to work more in sculpture, I began to do a lot of work that was like photography in the sense of sort of evidence or an index in the sort of semiotic language, or proof of something. So I would do castings, because to me, castings and photography are really related. A casting is like a photograph in three dimensions. So actually, I would take like old not scrap, but building supplies or architectural elements or domestic objects, and then try casting into them. So I would make a mold out of these domestic objects and furniture and cast clay into them, which the first one just totally exploded. And then I made a piece called Piecing It All Back Together, because my titles are quite literal a lot of the time. So for me, the process of actually making this thing and then having it explode, and then needing to dig through all the rubble in the kiln and find the pieces and then reassemble it, like that became really part of the process and part of the piece. And I wanted the final piece to have evidence of that. So there's a real connection. Obviously, this is not a slide lecture, so I can't show you, but there's a real visual connection to a lot of my work. But I, up until quite recently, hadn't begun working with those actual found objects as the art object. They were always the means to making the art object. So they would be the mold, and then the final piece was clay. Like I did a piece where I took 300 pounds of clay and I sandwiched it, smushed it between, a window and a dresser, and stuck the whole thing in the kiln. So this process that had made the clay strong, firing it, burned away the objects that shaped it, and so it was this whole process that was sort of an allegory for this story about like how maybe you're shaped by your surroundings, and then like they go away and you're strong, something like that. In any case, so that content was always really masked in this sort of like formalism and abstraction, and partially I think that was because I'm like looking to Sasha, because she got her MFA at the same place, Massachusetts College of Art, that I went to undergrad, and I think that art school in general, I don't think really, my experience was that personal stories and personal content was not privileged and was not really allowed, or I never felt like it was really allowed. And so my personal content and my personal story was always sort of like masked in these layers of abstraction and these layers of like art materials, like, oh, the final thing is made of clay, it's a sculpture, or like plaster. Those are sculpture materials. And so I think that my last semester at UCLA, that really shifted for me in a huge way. And so the write-up on the wall says this, but I'll just also mention that the first recording that I ever recorded of my grandmother, I recorded probably just a few months after my mother killed herself, and that was when I was 16. And so I think that in some ways I was always sort of like revisiting this content and revisiting this like space and this time and this idea of this, like searching for answers. And that's also like a huge, like something that I really value in terms of my art process, and that I try to encourage in terms of like the way that students use art, that it's like a path of inquiry. It's not, it's a way that I find answers, and it's a way that I find hidden answers that are maybe something that I don't have the words for, but I can bring out into the world through visual aspect, or through visual means. And so that story has always been there, like lurking in the corner of my artwork and lurking behind behind maybe sometimes formalism and sometimes abstraction. But my final semester at UCLA, I decided, it happened as a result of something that happened to me, which is that I received a suicide note from my mother that I didn't know existed. And it was like all of a sudden this thing like pierced through space and time and like came to me, and I was like, what am I making in terms of art? Like, what am I doing? And I love the art that I love the art that I made at UCLA and the art that I made during that time. I'm not at all discrediting that work, but it really it was like all of a sudden I had this thing that was really real, and it just like pierced through all of that kind of like academic baggage in a way that I think I had like started to lug with me over the years, like professors being like, oh, you shouldn't do that, or like, oh, people don't care about feelings. What is this, art therapy? I don't think that anyone actually literally said that, but that was what I heard in my head. And so, so I thought to myself, this was actually after my thesis show, I thought, well, I have an MFA now. Like, now I'm going to do an art project called I Talk on the Phone with My Grandma, and it's art because I have my MFA now, and what are you going to say? So that's what I mean when I say using art as a tool. So, and I guess that's also like using my credentials as a tool. So like the credentials that I received from UCLA through my artwork, then I could say, okay, well, I'm going to do this thing that really I just want to do, talk on the phone with my grandma, and I'm going to call it art. And that was that I ended up also making an installation around that, and that was also my first real step into installation. And I didn't use the actual audio. I printed transcripts because it was still a little too real. And so this has been the first chance that I've had to actually use that audio that I've been recording over the years. Geez, I mean, right before this talk, somebody came up and asked me a bunch of questions that actually people have asked me similar questions when I had the show up in LA, and I guess they're sort of about like, oh, what does this mean? What does this mean? And I think that also I will address those, but I think something I also wanted to say in terms of maybe this is like my position with this, but also my position as an artist and as a teacher is something that also came up for me that I began reflecting on when I was making this is just how being specific with your art, like having this very specific idea of what you want to communicate, makes the work stronger, but you don't have to make sure that that's what everyone gets. And I don't know if that makes sense exactly, but a few people have said, is there a specific thing you want me to get from this installation? And there's very specific stories that I have in mind with that. There's very specific reasons that decisions were made, but I'm actually, in a lot of ways, more interested in how people relate to the space and the stories that you all end up bringing to it. So one thing I'd really love people to do is like make sure I want to make sure everyone knows you can walk through the installation, you can pick up the phones and listen to them. Please do that. Feel free to sit on the cushions. That's what they're there for. And also, if you want, I left a book on the front desk that if you want to like write what your thoughts are and your impressions or anything you thought, I would love to read that and hear that too. But I will kind of like go through the pieces and talk a little bit about them. All right, so I'll talk about the net, because that's like the reoccurring theme. The net that's that's displayed on the outside, that sort of three-dimensional net that comes down in a cone, that is really about that moment where I received that note and it's like pierced through space and time. And I started thinking about, okay, so it's like time travel. All right. So a wormhole is how you travel through time. I'm not sure if people know this. The way that a wormhole is formed is that an object that has so much mass, like a planet, pierces through, and like it like pierces through the fabric of space and time, and it creates a wormhole, and then you can travel through time. So then I started thinking about like what happens, like maybe there's objects here on Earth that have so much emotional weight, like so much emotional mass, that they can actually pierce through space and time and like create a wormhole, and you can time travel. So that was like this idea that I was spinning out on for a while, and I made this whole installation, and et cetera, et cetera. And that is also, that's sort of thinking about that idea, but also thinking about it in relation to these telephones, and taking telephone wire and then weaving a wormhole out of telephone wire, and thinking about the relationship of these objects, these telephones, as devices that help me go back in time and listen to these recordings that I've listened to, and also that could be something where you're kind of going back in time, and there's like this nostalgia element to them because some of them are rotary phones, but it's really like about going back in time and listening to the proof of these conversations, these recordings, which also sort of reflect that idea of proof or photography or casting. The net on the inside of the installation is a little different. It's not different, but it's like another way of thinking about netting, and this idea of this grid that I was looking at this grid, this space and time grid, and like thinking about grids, and grids are things that we align ourselves to. They're the things that we don't think about. Like a grid is something you align yourself to. An ideology is something you align yourself to, and you don't really think about it. And like culture is something you align yourself to, and you don't really think about it. Like it's just like the stuff that's around. It's air, it's wallpaper, and so that's why there's the wallpaper that is the net, that is that sort of grid. But then also, it kind of comes down, and it's literally a net, like in the room. So I imagine everyone has not had a chance to listen to the phone conversations. So some of the phone conversations do talk about culture.
They thought I passed out. They were slapping me. They were slapping because I was like, you know.
And thinking about culture as this abstract thing, like this wallpaper, but then also being like, oh, that's what it looks like in reality. Like there it is on the floor, it's a net. Or like that's the thing you're calling culture, is like this really violent, like a violent history, or like one of the things that I'm really interested in is this history of trauma, or like this history of like patterns of repetition that happen within a family, and how those sort of play out. I'm probably done. I'm probably out of time.
We're about there, yeah.
All right. I think that's everything I had to say.